So what sort of needs do Muslims have that need to be fulfilled in order for them not to feel discriminated against?
One of the main needs is prayer rooms. Devout Muslims pray as many as 3 times a day during the workday. They also want tolerance in terms of their dress. If they're wearing a hijab, a headscarf, or a prayer cap, if they're a man, they don't want to be wearing that and suddenly being accused of being a terrorist.
Right, these are all things that everyone needs to keep in mind, and it can go a long way if you practice it on a daily basis, but only becomes an issue when there's some headlines that perhaps are disturbing. Can you give some best practices of how this is played out and what happens when companies adhere to this carefully?
Sure. We talked to a company, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey, and they have an affinity group for Muslims as well as many other diverse populations, and they brought people together. They brought people together after the Paris attacks last year to just clear the air. People had a lot of questions. What does it mean to be Muslim? Do you support this kind of attack? Obviously not. And that was very effective.
I have a question about those affinity groups, because oftentimes what can happen is that you get the community together within that company, but how do you make sure you broaden it to others who are not in that community within that company? For instance, non-Muslims in that company.
You have to have meetings where you're inviting other people in, and they've done that at a few companies that are on top of this, and have lunch meetings, have questions answered. What does it mean to be a Muslim woman, for instance? Does that mean you're subservient? And as people raise questions, make sure you have meetings.
What's the level of acceptance right now? As you mentioned, we had the Paris attacks. There are tensions out there.
There are tensions out there. I think it's particularly difficult for Muslim employees who are interfacing with customers in large retail spaces, because people come in from the public and they have stereotypes, and they might address the person and say, what are you doing here? Why don't you go home? That's particularly difficult. If you're within a company internally, the company has more control over creating tolerance.